I think she was happy, make no mistake about that. I think she had found a degree of happiness with Dodi Fayed that she hadn't found in other relationships, probably because, in my estimation, that it had been the first one she'd actually gone public with.
She said she had no intention of giving the interview, but suddenly it seemed right, particularly with a divorce and a gagging clause, she believed, and drawing ever nearer. It was then or never.
So, something unexpected has reportedly resurfaced inside the palace, and it has left King Charles facing questions surrounding one of the most painful chapters of his life.
It is about journeying forward into the future, while also journeying back to remember the past and learn from its lessons.
For years, Diana's death has remained deeply emotional for the royal family.
One could question Diana's loyalty. It was, absolutely solid. That was her role, irrespective of the unhappiness that she was experiencing in her own life.
But this latest development could put an entirely different perspective on what happened afterward.
They were there for a reason, and Diana dealt with that. I think she found it annoying at times and invasive, there's no doubt.
The discovery has already sparked curiosity about William, Harry, and Charles, while raising questions that many thought had been settled long ago. But what exactly was uncovered, and why has it left Charles so deeply torn?
I found myself born into this particular position. I'm determined to make the most of it and to do whatever I can to help, and I hope leave things behind a little bit better than I found them.
So, what do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. To help us create more videos and uncover the latest royal story, please subscribe. Document revealing Diana's final message. So when people talk about Princess Diana's final years, they usually focus on the photographs, the headlines, and that tragic night in Paris. But according to one of the people who spent time closest to her, the real story was far more personal. It wasn't just about royal drama or public attention. It was about a woman trying to find peace while living under a spotlight that never seemed to switch off. Now this is where things get interesting. Diana's former bodyguard remembered a side of her that many people never saw. By the mid-1990s, after years of intense scrutiny, she was navigating a life that looked glamorous from the outside, but often felt complicated behind closed doors. Crowds followed her everywhere. Photographers watched her every move, and even the simplest outing could quickly become international news. What stood out most to those protecting her was how determined she remained to live as normally as possible. Despite being one of the most recognized women in the world, she still wanted freedom, privacy, and meaningful relationships. She devoted herself to charitable work, connected effortlessly with ordinary people, and carried a warmth that made strangers feel instantly comfortable. Yet there were moments when the pressures of fame seemed impossible to escape. Here's what's happened. Long before the world mourned her loss, Diana had already endured years of personal challenges following her marriage to Prince Charles. The fairy tale wedding at St. Paul's Cathedral in 1981 had captivated millions, but the reality proved far more complicated. By the time her final years arrived, she was trying to build a new chapter for herself while balancing motherhood, public duties, and constant media attention. Then came the journey that ended in Paris beneath the Pont de l'Alma underpass in August 1997. The tragedy shocked the world, but for those who had known and protected her, the memories that remained were not of headlines. They were of a compassionate, determined woman who never stopped searching for a life that felt truly her own, despite extraordinary circumstances that few people could ever imagine. Everyone thought they knew Princess Diana from the headlines and photographs. But what did the people closest to her see when the cameras were gone? Why did a woman admired by millions still seem to be searching for something missing, and what really happened behind the fairy tale image the world believed? Stay with us, because this story reveals a very different side of Diana. The king's decision. For weeks, royal watchers expected July 1st to pass like so many anniversaries before it. Princess Diana's 65th birthday was approaching, and the assumption across Britain was almost universal. The palace would remain silent. No official tribute, no carefully worded statement, no public acknowledgement of the woman whose memory had long occupied one of the monarchy's most sensitive chapters. That silence had become a tradition of its own, one many believed would never change. As newspapers prepared retrospective features and television commentators reflected on Diana's extraordinary legacy, attention focused less on what the royal family might do than on what it would avoid doing. Few imagined there would be any departure from the familiar pattern. The expectation was simple: another quiet day, leaving the public to remember the people's princess in their own way. Then everything appeared to shift. According to palace insiders, King Charles personally approved an unexpected symbolic gesture just days before the anniversary. The decision was reportedly made without fanfare, without advance publicity, and without any attempt to attract cameras. Only a small circle inside the royal household was said to know what had been authorized. Yet word of the king's involvement began circulating almost immediately, setting off waves of speculation across Britain before anyone even understood the full story. The mystery only grew deeper because the palace refused to explain its reasoning. There was no official briefing, no detailed announcement, and no effort to answer the questions that quickly followed. Instead, silence remained, but this time it carried a different weight. It no longer felt like avoidance. It felt deliberate, almost as though something significant was unfolding behind closed doors. Commentators struggled to interpret what it could mean. Some believed the king was attempting to acknowledge Diana's lasting place in British history. Others wondered whether this marked a subtle effort to close one of the monarchy's longest-running emotional chapters. More skeptical voices questioned whether the timing was simply too convenient, asking why such a gesture would come nearly 3 decades after Diana's death rather than years earlier. Across social media and newspaper opinion pages, one question appeared again and again. Why now? For many people, the timing was impossible to ignore. Diana's 65th birthday represented more than another anniversary. It symbolized the life she never had the chance to live, the grandmother she never became, and the future forever interrupted. Any action connected to that milestone carried emotional significance far beyond ordinary royal tradition. Whatever King Charles had reportedly approved, it was already accomplishing something few expected. Britain was talking about Diana once again, not because of old headlines or familiar debates, but because of a decision that seemed to challenge years of quiet distance. The answers had not yet emerged, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. This was no ordinary royal anniversary, and the king's unexpected choice was about to reopen a conversation the nation believed had already been written into history. If one silent gesture changed everything, what unseen decision prompted it? Why are longtime royal observers suddenly rethinking years of tradition? Could the king's quiet move reveal something hidden for decades? The next discovery transforms quiet speculation into an unforgettable royal mystery. Stay tuned. Final search for happiness. What was Princess Diana really searching for during the final chapter of her life? Years after the world watched every headline, every photograph, and every public appearance, her former bodyguard's reflections paint a far more personal picture, one that goes beyond the flashing cameras and endless speculation. According to those who stood close enough to witness her daily life, Diana was not simply a global icon. She was a woman trying to find peace, happiness, and a future she could truly call her own. After leaving royal life behind, Diana searched for something she had rarely experienced, a relationship built on genuine connection rather than status. One person who seemed to offer that was British-Pakistani heart surgeon Hasnat Khan. After meeting through London's Royal Brompton Hospital, the two developed a close bond. Friends later said Diana admired his intelligence, quiet personality, and the way he treated her like an ordinary person, instead of a princess. For someone who had spent years living under intense public attention, that meant a great deal. Their relationship grew serious enough for discussions about marriage to emerge. Diana reportedly imagined building a life far removed from the traditions and pressures of the monarchy. At one stage, the possibility of living in Pakistan was even considered, highlighting how committed she had become to making the relationship work. However, the constant media attention surrounding Diana created challenges that neither could fully overcome. Khan valued privacy and preferred a life away from cameras, while Diana remained one of the most photographed women in the world. Over time, those pressures became increasingly difficult to manage. Despite the uncertainty in her personal life, Diana continued dedicating herself to the charitable causes that had become central to her legacy. Throughout 1997, she attended public engagements, supported humanitarian efforts, and connected with people who admired her compassion and warmth. That same summer, Diana traveled to Saint-Tropez in southern France as a guest of Mohammed Al Fayed. She spent time with Princes William and Harry, hoping to enjoy a brief escape from public scrutiny. Instead, photographers closely followed her movements. It was during this period that her friendship with Dodi Al Fayed, the film producer behind projects including Chariots of Fire, drew growing media attention. As their connection appeared to deepen, so did worldwide fascination with her private life. According to her former bodyguard, Diana remained a woman caught between hope and uncertainty, seeking a future where she could live freely while the world continued to watch her every move. The world watched Princess Diana through endless headlines and flashing cameras, but was the most important chapter of her life hidden from public view? Why did those closest to her speak of a very different Diana behind closed doors? And what was truly unfolding during the pivotal summer of 1997? Let's uncover the story.
Silence finally broken. The longer the palace remained silent, the louder the questions became. Britain had grown accustomed to anniversaries connected to Princess Diana's passing without official recognition from the highest levels of the monarchy. Over the years, that quiet approach had become an unwritten rule, one that many believed would never be challenged. Yet this time, something felt unmistakably different. Subtle preparations had begun inside royal circles several days before Diana's 65th birthday. They were not the kind of arrangements that announced themselves with grand ceremonies or elaborate public schedules. Instead, they were quiet, carefully coordinated, and visible only to those who paid close attention to the smallest changes surrounding the king's activities. That alone was enough to spark curiosity. Royal observers reportedly noticed unusual adjustments to the king's diary. Meetings were quietly rearranged. Certain engagements appeared to receive unexpected priority, while others seemed deliberately kept away from public attention. None of these details proved anything on their own, yet together they painted a picture that many commentators found difficult to ignore. Soon, speculation spread beyond palace gates. Some royal experts argued that King Charles had reached a point in his reign where acknowledging difficult chapters of royal history had become unavoidable. They believed the symbolic gesture reflected a monarch determined to present a more compassionate institution, one capable of recognizing the emotional scars that still existed within the nation. Others strongly disagreed. Critics questioned whether the timing served another purpose entirely. They wondered whether the decision was designed to reshape Charles's own public image rather than honor Diana herself. To them, the gesture raised as many questions as it answered. If this tribute truly came from the heart, why had it taken nearly 3 decades to happen? Why wait until Diana's 65th birthday to quietly break years of royal tradition? Those competing interpretations quickly divided public opinion. Some people described the reported gesture as an overdue acknowledgement of a woman whose humanitarian work had transformed public expectations of the monarchy. Others remained cautious, refusing to separate emotion from history. Old wounds resurfaced as conversations returned to one of the most debated chapters in modern royal life. Yet despite those disagreements, something remarkable was happening. The discussion had shifted away from blame and toward meaning. Rather than revisiting familiar arguments about the past, people found themselves asking what the king's decision might represent for the future. Had Charles simply chosen to honor Diana's memory for one significant birthday? Or was he quietly changing the monarchy's relationship with one of its most unforgettable figures? That single question lingered everywhere. Every newspaper headline, television panel, and online discussion seemed to circle back to the same mystery. Had the king merely approved one symbolic act, or had he crossed an invisible line that previous generations had carefully avoided? Whatever the truth might be, one fact had become impossible to dismiss. The silence that had defined Diana's anniversaries for years had finally been broken. Not with dramatic speeches or elaborate ceremonies, but with a quiet decision that was already reshaping public conversation. And as more details threatened to emerge, Britain began wondering whether this unexpected moment was only the beginning of a much larger story. Why would this single gesture reopen decades of buried emotion? What unseen truth finally changed Charles's heart? And who quietly recognized its deeper meaning first? Keep watching. History quietly changes. By the end of Diana's 65th birthday, the reported gesture from King Charles had become something far greater than a single moment of royal symbolism. It marked the beginning of a quiet shift in how Britain chose to remember one of the most influential women ever connected to the monarchy. Nothing about the past had changed. The years of joy, heartbreak, controversy, and loss remained exactly as history recorded them. Yet the way people looked at that history seemed subtly different. Many observers described the moment as the closing of one chapter and the careful opening of another. Rather than allowing Diana's story to remain permanently defined by tragedy, the king's reported decision encouraged people to focus on the compassion, courage, and humanity that had always been at the center of her public life. Her legacy no longer seemed trapped by old disagreements. Instead, it appeared ready to speak to a new generation that had never experienced those difficult years firsthand. The monarchy also appeared to take an important step forward. It did not attempt to rewrite history or erase uncomfortable memories. Instead, it acknowledged that difficult chapters could exist alongside respect, reflection, and understanding. For many, that represented a more confident institution, one willing to recognize the complexity of its own past without allowing it to define its future. Across Britain, conversations gradually became less about blame and more about remembrance. Families continued sharing stories of where they had first encountered Diana's remarkable influence. Young people discovered why so many older generations still spoke about her with such warmth. Historians reflected on how public memory often evolves, revealing that time does not necessarily diminish great figures, but sometimes deepens appreciation for what they truly represented. Forgiveness also became part of the discussion, though not in the simple sense of forgetting painful events. Instead, people considered whether a nation could honor someone's legacy while accepting that history itself would always remain imperfect. That quiet reflection carried enormous emotional weight because it suggested healing was possible without pretending the past had never happened. As for King Charles, this account leaves his true intentions open to interpretation. Some believed the reported gesture reflected personal growth. Others saw it as thoughtful leadership during a significant moment in national memory. Still others questioned whether the symbolism arrived far too late. Yet regardless of those differing opinions, the outcome remained remarkably similar. Britain spent Diana's 65th birthday talking not about conflict, but about compassion, legacy, and the enduring influence of a woman whose story continues to shape the nation's heart. Perhaps that became the greatest significance of all. One quiet decision, made without grand speeches or dramatic ceremonies, inspired millions to remember Diana not simply as a princess of the past, but as a lasting symbol of kindness, whose influence reached beyond generations. It was never about changing the facts of history. Instead, it encouraged people to look back with greater understanding, compassion, and honesty. Across Britain, conversations quietly shifted as many reflected on Diana's remarkable ability to connect with ordinary people and the lasting impact of her humanitarian work. Younger generations discovered her story through a fresh perspective, while those who remembered her life found new reasons to reflect on her enduring legacy. The monarchy, too, appeared more willing to acknowledge the emotions that had shaped one of its most difficult chapters. In the end, history itself had not been rewritten. It had simply been viewed through a gentler lens, leaving Britain deeply moved and quietly changed forever together, with Diana's memory continuing to inspire hope, compassion, and unity. So, what do you think? Did King Charles's gesture truly honor Diana's legacy, or was it simply too late? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more royal stories every week.